Welcome everybody to episode 2 of Turning the Key with myself, Patrick, and my co-host Sean. Every
Hello.
week we are speaking into pairs of archetypes within the I Ching gene keys, and today we're going to be speaking about two keys, two archetypes, and within the gene keys, they're hexagrams 27 and 28. And those are the keys of selflessness, the gift of altruism, the shadow of selfishness, and 28, immortality, the gift of totality, the shadow of purposelessness. So if you're watching, paying attention to where in your life you may be or have been experiencing experiences around selfishness, purposelessness would be a great entry point of how to connect into our talk. So without further ado, maybe Sean, I always love when you get us started with speaking into just the I Ching, the base trigrams that make up these hexagrams. So
For
maybe
sure.
let's start with selflessness and
Selflessness for
20,
yeah, for
27.
hexagram 27. Yeah, it's a strong hexagram. It's mountain over thunder. And the traditional names are nourishing or nourishment. And the two yang lines at the top and the bottom, and then the yin lines all making up the body of the hexagram is said to represent a mouth of the lips opening and then the broken teeth and then eating.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot about nourishment, and I know that Richard Rudd speaks to that of how we nourish ourselves and how that kind of needing to put something in your mouth, needing something to nourish yourself, can really fuel our selfishness. When we're thinking that we're not getting our needs met, how we put ourselves forward, and that was an important piece of our evolutionary soup alchemy when we were living, more as hunters and gatherers, and survival really had a lot to do with the food that we were gathering and the food that we were collecting and the food that would take us through a winter or through, a famine or a drought.
Mhm.
But some of the larger, speaking of mountain under thunder, for me is that when you look at the earth and you look at the geophysics of the earth, it lays over classical Chinese medicine philosophy pretty beautifully. And when you look at the orogeny, which is when two plates subduct and then it starts to push up the earth and create mountains. And that energy of what's underneath the mountain is a thunder, is the lava coming up, is this active energy that's living within the belly of the earth. And if you were to do some time-lapse photography of the mountains, let's say over millions of years, you would see the white-capped peaks of the mountains lifting and lowering during their freeze and thaw cycles, lifting and lowering, much like teeth. And the mountains are literally breaking themselves down. And the rocks at the mountaintops are eventually coming down and being digested and turning into the soil that kind of creates and feeds life through that whole biome and ecosystem, and then becomes the sand on the beaches until it's pushed back into the ocean to then settle back down on the ocean floor and then again be subducted or digested or eaten back into the center of the earth. So mountain over thunder speaks to our whole digestive process
Mhm.
of what we're eating and also how we're eating, which is so important. So it's like, what do you put in your mouth to nourish yourself? How do you eat? So it's not only are you nourishing yourself with food, but are you nourishing yourself with gratitude? Are you nourishing yourself with the type of emotional energy that you're staying in, day out?
Mhm.
And also that the manner of like where are your thoughts while you're eating?
Yeah.
And like this custom of saying grace, or at least saying thank you and acknowledging the whole process of what brought that food to your table, which
Mhm.
nowadays we're very disconnected to.
Yeah.
Um, so really physiologically, this has a lot to do with the relationship between the gallbladder and the stomach
Mhm. Oh
and
yeah.
how we bring in fats to our body, how we break down our food. Are we overeating? Are we, distinguishing our digestive flower fire with a lot of, icy drinks or sugary drinks? And so it not only does it speak to what we're eating, but it speaks to how we're eating it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting more and more connecting with this archetype and in some ways in the I Ching it's spoken of as like jaws, and
Hmm.
and um and when you look literally at the hexagram it looks like a jaw,
Yeah.
like an open mouth. And I'll say that this pair for me, selflessness and immortality, have been a pair for took me quite some time to really get. And I think that that was in part because I had kind of a distorted view around what my relationship with giving was. And the shadow of selfishness, and maybe some people are very honest and they'll claim when they're selfish in their lives,
Hmm.
or maybe they have an experience where they'll look at other people as being really selfish and, oh, I'm really giving, I'm really generous. Because to me, selflessness, this key 27, has so much to do with how we receive from the way that we give.
Hmm.
And where do we have laced into our giving energetics of selfishness,
Right.
where I'm giving to receive
Exactly.
rather than by giving, I do receive. And
Hmm.
there's a huge difference between that. If we're transactionally giving, and maybe we're building up some ledger in our minds about how we give to our partners, how we give to our business teams, how we give to just life in general, and then we're kind of waiting, hey, when can I cash in on this? When is life going to return to me on my investment? That transactional arrangement is poisoning your giving with this frequency of selfishness, where
Mm.
subtly or maybe overtly, but in my own experience, it was really tracking down the subtle waves of selfishness where I'd be giving, whether directly expecting from that person to receive something from them, love, connection, opportunity, whatever that may have been, or that I'd be kind of using it as barter with God, with life, saying, oh,
Right.
I really gave here. And so that means that life is going to give to me, rather than truly leaning into giving fully of myself without any of the expectation around return. And that's
Right.
where that altruism, I think, starts to come in. And that altruism, to me, I think, can only start to come in, that virtuous giving, that generosity can only really be true when you yourself are satiated,
Right.
not by the like needs of life of just the, my bank account needs to be in a certain space, or my partnership needs to be at a certain level, or I have to have all of these things done on my schedule, but that you're just satiated by where you are in your life fully, and you're trusting so fully of that that you
Hmm.
can give without that expectation that life needs to give anything back to you. And then in that you do receive in your giving, and then life
Yeah.
will present some magical experience for you to receive something that you really need, or in a beautiful surprising way.
Yeah. That's so beautiful and rings so true with how you can be selfish in your own giving.
Mhm.
And for me, in my own experience of giving from a place of starvation, giving from a place of lack or overextension, with this idea that if I just did more, if I gave more, if I sacrificed myself more, then obviously people would recognize it and then just give back to me and
Mhm.
match the level of abundance. But what was happening, and I really feel that this is programmed into us in our education system of like you get that A. If all you need to do is get the A and then you're going to be good, you know what I mean? And so it sets you up to like try to to meet people's expectations. And then there's some of us that just give and give and give and give, but we're not giving for that true exchange of energy of like what you're talking about, of giving from a selfless place. But we're giving in order to either to be recognized or giving with the expectation that we're going to get the reciprocal, our what we want as a reciprocal
Mm-hmm.
exchange, but without speaking it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Without like putting that forward and
Mm-hmm.
letting it be like a consensual agreement. And it's so interesting with the nourishment of like when you're giving from a place of starvation in yourself, you know,
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, where you're just like giving and giving and giving, and you're really running on empty. And that's not true altruism. Like and like the nourishment and the selfishness, like you see it in children when there's a bunch of children around and you put down a bowl of something delicious that they all want, you start to see how their minds start working of like, you know, and if there's any inequity in who gets what, the kids are on it. You know, he got more than me, and she got this one, and she got to pick first, or he got, like they like are so tuned in to that place of who gets what and how, and that like natural sense of fairness. And I think we can carry that into our adulthood of where we are giving and giving and giving, but inside we're keeping that score. We're keeping
Yeah.
that tally. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, oh my God, I just made my partner breakfast again. You know, and like
Mm-hmm.
when is that person ever going to make me breakfast?
And
You
the
know?
resentment that
And that
builds up.
resentment that
Mhm.
builds up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And that really erodes, can erode a whole, like your whole partnership, and can really, poison actually that nourishment
Mhm.
that actually comes from just giving, because you are nourished by seeing that person light up from your gift, and
Mhm.
that's enough. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more, Sean, with your knowledge of Chinese medicine, because now I'm starting to think of like the digestive system and
Hmm.
its ability to move and pass material, and thinking of, if you're giving with that tension around it,
Hmm.
where you're kind of holding on in some way with this tension in your body energetically with that person or with life, kind of wanting to take something back
Yeah.
that you've already given in a way, right? And so I'm
Yep.
curious how you see this playing out in terms of, physiologically for people with this archetype.
That's a great question. The first thing, like especially with Thunder Over Mountain, the thing that lights up for me in that imagery is the enteric nervous system. So the nervous system that innervates your intestines and is held in the peritoneal sac, which is basically the liver, gallbladder, stomach, pancreas, spleen, large intestine, small intestine. And that's a whole nervous system that is in and of itself standalone. It communicates via the vagus nerve with the brain and the central nervous system, but it doesn't need the nervous input from your brain to function, which is why people can have high cervical or vertebral injury and paralysis, but still their guts still work. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And the main neurotransmitter that is operating in that system is serotonin. Now, serotonin is also vital for in our brain to feel good, to feel happy, to feel satisfied and satiated, but with life. You know what I mean? It works with dopamine and other pathways of reward, and it is one of our feel good mechanisms, and it's what SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like they're working with that system to try to mitigate depression.
Mhm.
So if we are eating in a way where we're actually celebrating the scarcity in our life, meaning I'm not getting enough, or you're eating in a rushed way where it's like I don't even have time to sit down and enjoy my
Mhm.
deal, my meal. I'm eating because I'm driving through a fast food place and getting literal poison, and then I'm stuffing it down my face as I'm trying to navigate traffic and
Mhm.
that whole intense
Mhm.
space. When we are telling our bodies that we don't have enough happiness already, and we're trying to create the serotonin in our brains in order to like navigate and balance our emotional state chemically in our bodies, we're not going to have enough serotonin to be made for our guts. So
Mhm.
then our guts are going to be lacking in their ability to really be able to break down, digest, and absorb the nutrients.
Mhm.
And not only that, we have the greater omentum, which is this sheet of like fat and basically immune cells that can move and wrap around different places of your guts and heal it and regenerate it and nourish it. If our guts aren't supple and relaxed and able to move properly with our breath and with our movement, then that shuts down and our intestinal system literally starts to break down.
Mhm.
And so you get, IBS, which is inflammation, and then constipation, diarrhea. You get the inflammation in the different parts of the colon and the different parts of the intestines. And if you talking, most people have some type of digestive issue, whether it be elimination or assimilation, digestion, pain, gas, bloating, indigestion, lack of appetite. It's this whole relationship to food. And it's so normalized that you talk to most people and you say, "How's your digestion?" They'll say, "Fine." But ultimately, it's not.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So as a practitioner, you have to go in and you have to dig underneath their mountain and see what kind of thunder's going on there.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like,
And the grumbling of the
yeah,
belly,
yeah,
that's,
right.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That Borgarigmus is a huge sign of release, and it's also a place where energy and fluid is moving, and that greater momentum, what I was talking about, is actually moving in place and doing healing work.
Hmm.
So oftentimes in acupuncture and hands-on healing, hearing that grumble in the stomach is a really good sign that that energy is moving. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, like our stress manifests all along our diaphragm.
Hmm.
And so when your liver is tight, when you're not breathing and you're holding your breath, really gasping for air through your day, everything starts to shut down, lock down, and stiffen and become this kind of sclerotic place of minimum fluid exchange of
Hmm.
energy and vital fluids.
Hmm. And there's,
And yeah. Yeah, no, I just really love that, like literally hearing the thunder
yeah,
in,
yeah.
in your belly and what that means.
There's so much. I just love how these conversations open because there's so many things that I want to comment on. The first thing that was coming up as you were talking about this and really the psychology of our relationship with food took me
Hmm.
back when I was in college. I was doing this summer program where we were working with some different companies and doing these kind of like consulting projects for them. And one of those companies was Hershey, which is in Hershey,
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, and where I went to
Yeah.
school out in central Pennsylvania. It was close by. And I remember us going into the big conference room, and they have all the different candies on the table, and someone in a nice suit and is giving this very cheerful presentation about here at Hershey we believe that people should enjoy like and savor these like and celebrate these beautiful moments, and who can argue with that,
Right.
and it's like we don't condone like eating the whole entire chocolate bar. Take a couple of bites, like celebrate something, give yourself that celebration. And then
Right.
they flip to the next slide, and then they're showing all of this data about hand to mouth consumption, that the
Right.
fastest growing consumer products for candies, for snacks, are hand to mouth, where you reach your hand down into this bottomless pit
Right.
and then you put it into your mouth. Because if you have a chocolate bar, it's a finite thing. If you open it up, you open up
Mm.
a Butterfinger or whatever it is, and you can see, oh, well, there's a psychology that can come in and say, well, I don't want to be the person who eats the entire king size Butterfinger bar, you know? But if you give me a giant sack
Right.
of,
Of bites.
of Hershey Reese's Pieces, then
Right.
I can just kind of, and then you pop on the TV or you're in the
Yeah.
car and you're
Yeah.
totally dissociated from what's going
Yeah.
on, and your
Yeah.
survival brain is just going and boom, boom,
Right.
boom. It becomes so
Right.
automatic,
Yeah.
so automatic.
Well, they
That,
hijack your selfishness.
and then the compounds within them,
Yeah.
and look up. This isn't going to necessarily be a whole like dissecting the whole, food compounds podcast, but let's just say that there, might be certain substances within those that, and there's a whole science. I've
Oh,
seen the
oh my God.
laboratories that are engineering craving, really.
Oh yeah.
And so that becomes this whole thing where whether it's through our relation, I think it really all stems back to our relationship with food, because food is just so base primal survival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and then you look at things like soil health, and
Yeah.
you go into my experience going into the grocery store nowadays is that I'm expecting 99% of the things in there to poison me or try to kill
Right.
me.
Right.
And that it becomes a game of finding the needle in the haystack in order to get just anything organic, clean for my family. And even that is seemingly under attack more and more about what can be labeled as organic and what practices. But um, but when the food is so destroyed and you're not getting the base nutrients to support your system, to support your digestive tract, to feel this
Mhm.
sense of fullness in your gut, that like I feel nourished and I feel good and I feel taken care of by the life that I'm receiving into me, then of course you're not going to feel that you have this entire well of generosity to
Right.
fully authentically give to others from. You're running on fumes, and so you're giving fumes, and in subtly lacing that giving with these expectations of like really there's a cry of desperation deep down, like please help me,
Yeah.
and this like anger and grief under there of like I need nourishment from life. And so then I was just thinking about, it's like our greatest teachers are right there in front of our eyes every single day. How many times have you walked outside next to the closest tree in your house and counted or thought about how many molecules of oxygen it's given to you to
Right.
survive?
Right. Exactly.
Never. It doesn't
Right.
need your acknowledgement. It doesn't need your praise.
Yeah.
And yet
Right.
it's just giving by its very nature. In fact, it doesn't even interpret it
Yeah.
as
Right.
giving, because it's just is its isness of how it lives and
Yeah.
how it relates with life around it. And it's also receiving from its own environment in all of these different ways.
Oh,
But
beautiful.
then there's this other layer that I love how you brought in the school system and the employment system. And when you think of like debt and just
Mm-hmm.
chasing
Mm-hmm.
this survival to like live some sort of life that feels satiated, it's a never ending journey. Our
Yeah.
jaws are just trying to chomp at every single thing that we can across our lives to
Exactly.
feel that sense of nourishment. And in all of that, I've come to find in my own relationship, not only with this key, but just in my relationship with generosity and with gratitude, we say thank you
Mm-hmm.
or give birthday gifts and stuff all the time. And that's been something that's just so through and through throughout our lives that we experience, and we play into those. But to actually give authentically and to actually feel genuine gratitude are not, to me, are not beginner level things, like
Mm-hmm. No.
because when there's so much of a stigma around it and it's become so automatic, actually those are some of the places that you should take a look at, because where is your thank you coming from?
Yeah.
Where is your giving from? And it's almost better to not do just repeat the mechanized thank you, or not to just give just because you're supposed to give, until you really get clear in yourself of, can I root that thank you from a real deep authentic space where I feel it
Right.
fully, because otherwise you're just passing around the empty gas
Yeah.
in space.
That, yeah, you just hit on so many things. Like that deep sense, and I feel that deep sincere thank you of when you receive a gift. Like, let's just go back to the trees. When you receive that oxygen, or you receive the scent of a flower, or receive the beauty of a sunset, and there's no strings attached. You know what I mean? It's just the virtue of that experience is just the beauty, is the respiration, is the scent or the medicine. That I feel that that receiving and your authentic expression of gratitude is what starts to lift you from your own selfishness into altruism. You know what I mean? Because then you want to then give that thank you back, and so then that thank you then returns to you, and it creates this reciprocal loop. Reminds me of a poem by Hafiz or Hafiz, as some people pronounce it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like, never once has the sun turned to the moon and said, "You owe me." And what does a love like that do for the world? It lights up the whole sky,
Uh,
you know? And so like that space and like going back to the nourishment, like I'm a single dad, raising my two kids half time. And there's something so poignant about cooking, cooking for yourself and then cooking for others, cooking for just your family or cooking in community. And there's something really magical about sharing a meal with a lot of people, and how incredibly gorgeous that expression of humanity is, and how everybody is attuned to everybody getting enough. You know what I mean? Like to really host a great meal, everybody is satiated. You know what I mean?
mhm,
And like that level of giving just for the experience of the food, and it's the food that then brings people together and creates
mhm,
that community. And whereas like we went from this place of like, oh, we just have to eat just because we might die, to now we have enough, so let's make sure everybody eats. You know what
mhm,
I mean?
mhm,
And expressing our thankfulness for the abundance that's around us. And then that can only really be appreciated when you see everybody else taking a part of that abundance. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
mhm.
And it's like, and it's so true. Like we live in the United States and we live with all this privilege, but then you see other people in other countries or even in this country in different communities starving, not having enough. And like if you really sit with that feeling, you start to realize that like if there is other people starving and dying of lack of nourishment, then I too am starving in some way. You
Exactly.
know what I mean?
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. This key to me of all the keys rings with the most. It's like it is pure aliveness. Like
Mm,
selflessness, this key is
right.
pure aliveness. And when I think of yin yang, I see selflessness as the yin with the drop
Mm,
in it
mm,
of to live fully selflessly is to give of yourself fully. So there's the death. That's the drop in the depth of that selflessness is
right.
this it is this nourishment, this taking in and
Yeah.
experiencing this experience of aliveness and fulfillment and nourishment for
Mm,
myself comes by me integrating my ability to let go
mm,
and to give of myself to others. And that's that little death,
yeah.
when I give to you, I
Right.
give a part of me.
Yeah.
And and thinking more mystically when we start to get into the higher octaves, because we've kind of been speaking a lot in the selfishness shadow
Hmm.
and the altruism gift. And again, anybody who's listening, I invite you really to consider, if there's one thing that you take away from this conversation around selfishness and giving, it's to really take inventory of your life and the way that you give to others, and
Right.
where there are subtle spaces of that transactional expectation laced into your giving. And then really exploring that. Where did that come from? Why have I felt like there's not enough for me? And how, maybe what is one act, or what is one way of giving in maybe it doesn't have to be such, a big thing around birthdays, but it can be something very small and seemingly insignificant. If you go into a store or something like that and you run into a stranger, where can you give from this deep space of authenticity? Like, it can be a simple gesture of
Yep.
giving. and let it be full, like full within your system. I need nothing from this. And
Yeah.
to actually give is to receive in this moment. And then it's done. Just like you pluck the flowers, you have the bouquet of flowers, and at some point you throw it out to the earth to be composted. You don't ever think about that bouquet that you
Yeah.
got 3 years ago ever again. But I wanted to speak now, getting into the selflessness, where this is where the giving kind of takes on this this quality of death, that it's like to give, so to give all of yourself, to give the fullness of yourself, that you literally give fully of your separate self over.
Mm-hmm.
And there you can enter into the stream of the interconnectedness of life, and that
Yes.
you start to move out of this consciousness of there are finite resources. As somebody who studied chemical engineering and was taught the laws of thermodynamics, and um, that one of the given truths of the universe is that there's, the eventual heat death of the universe, kind of gives this ominous overtone to life, that eventually it's all just going to fizzle out, that there's a ticking clock, and that there's a finite number of materials that are just going to deplete. And this key and its gateways within the gene keys, where Richard talks about it being the gateway to the miraculous, and miraculous
Mm-hmm.
healing, instantaneous
Mm-hmm.
healing, which truly is profound. And if you want to learn more about that, highly recommend you pick up a copy of the Gene Keys and read the 27th Gene Key, or
Mm-hmm.
listen to Richard's contemplation on it. But to me, that space, that like the highest reaches of life-giving power that humans can engage in, comes from the giving fully of yourself, and that you create this unlimited well of resource from which you can give. It's infinite. You can
Yep.
never be drained. You can never be drained because there's no separate finite entity that can be depleted.
Yeah. And
And
that,
yeah.
go
Mhm.
ahead. I was just, yeah. I love how you brought in the thermodynamics. And for me, it's always been interesting that the first law of thermodynamics is always stated, but nobody really like holds on to it.
Mhm.
Like the very first law is that, matter and energy can't be created or destroyed. It just changes form. So even if there is this heat death, what's going to happen to all the matter and
Mhm.
energy? It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Like there is no annihilation, and I think it's just so like what you're saying is just seeing the interconnectedness of life is really an expression that we're all unified through this field of experience. Through life is a unification. And if you look at an environment, it's, life changing into life, changing into life, changing into life. And this whole idea that it's survival of the fittest has now been totally refuted. Total bullshit, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And they called it like nature, the Journal of Nature has been like, no, like actually the law of the jungle is mutual aid. And the
Mhm.
way that that's expressed is through the trees more than anything, and not
Mhm.
just the way that they give through the respiration, but through the
The
mycelial connection.
mycelial connection. Mhm.
And in the soil where all these organisms are working together to say, hey, this tree over in the corner isn't giving enough light, so the trees that are getting more than enough light is actually creating that nutrients and sending it over to the tree that's not getting enough.
Mhm.
And when you go to a watering hole, you'll see predator and prey drinking together,
Exactly. That's so fascinating
and
in Africa. It's like it's like kind of the rules are suspended for a moment.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's almost like the rules have been agreed upon. And there's this moment in the predator prey, mortal coil that when the prey gets caught, it's almost like there's a surrender, you
Hmm.
know what I mean? And
Hmm.
they like relax. It's not this like torturous thing that we've, projected upon.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure like, the terror and the, the self-preservation is real. We feel it in our bodies because
Hmm.
that's a part of our heritage. moving out of moving through the animal world. But really, it's this awesome paradox where selfishness and selflessness actually meld into each other. Because when I see the world as an extension of myself, when I give to the world, I'm giving to myself. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah,
When I
that's
help another person, I'm helping myself. It's like there I can be selfish in this way by just giving completely of myself and then never moving from a place of scarcity because like the scarcity is just maybe momentary. Just like my hunger is momentary, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like when you fast, actually when you break into day 2, 3, 4, you're not really that hungry anymore. You
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like you're not having any food, but you're still, that experience of I need to put something in my mouth is a context. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's relative.
Mhm.
And I love your invitation of really tuning in to how we are giving. And I would extend that to people to really be like, how are you receiving?
Mhm.
When you receive abundance from the universe or from another person, like how are you letting that in? You know what
Mhm.
I mean? How are you able to move into that space of not necessarily being selfish, but taking care of yourself and nourishing yourself?
Mhm.
And there's no greater time that like than you're receiving is when you're actually eating. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
And like how do you receive your food? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And is it in this rushed, stressed out overwhelm? Or is there an actual grace there? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That
Then that,
consumption and, the consumption on the feed in social media
yeah,
as
the
well, and
feed. Yeah, the feed.
how many people sit, and I'm guilty of it also in my own experience and of like sitting and eating a meal and sitting
Yeah,
on my phone and scrolling.
right. Yeah.
And that there's this numbing effect of our ability to really connect with the experience of receiving.
Mm,
And probably this got most exacerbated during years, maybe a decade ago or something, when I was really deep into CrossFit, and
mm,
I was like, I was listing out all of the food components that I was eating and my
yep,
calories and counting them.
yep,
And it became,
yep.
and that was sort of taught in a way. It was like eating has to become your
Mm,
second job.
hmm.
And I would bring almost like a suitcase with me to work.
Right,
And I was just like consuming, 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 but it was all about the numbers. And it wasn't at all about like the experience of that happening in my body. And now I find more and more I eat far less, but I'm like more enriched by what I'm eating because I'm bringing more presence to it. And also, I live in an area where the food has far greater nutrient density. It's
that's
like
awesome.
it's so distinctly different, and for people who listen who know anything about um, plant dietas or fasting, having experienced going and doing that in the Amazon jungle where you're going and you're fasting for periods of time, then maybe you'll have a meal where it will be like some root vegetables and, some rice, um, where some of those, unfortunately, I think this is where like, it's not like, oh, the stuff is getting plucked from the jungle, maybe in certain
Right.
places, but in terms of the camps that we're going to, there's a little bit of this like westernization,
Yeah, of
consumerism
course.
of like the stuff is coming from a store deep in, far away in town that is pretty nutrient depleted. And you can
Yep.
feel that in your system, which is
Hmm.
okay because it supports maybe just um, the elimination of stimulus that you're engaging in to connect with the spirit of the plant in that journey. But in going through those experiences here and taking myself through those experiences here, I felt so much more, even just with the little bit that I was eating, I could, in that extra sensitivity, to tune into the nutrient density.
Mm,
You take one piece of lettuce from what I
hmm.
was eating there versus one piece of lettuce that grew in our garden, and it's like the energy quality that exists in it was so much greater, and so
Right.
therefore I
Right.
don't need to eat as much, and I'm satiated
Right.
more, and I feel lighter, and without so much of this just like raw empty density that we're
Yeah.
flushing through our system.
Right.
Think about how many gifts people give during the holiday periods that just get thrown away. And
Right.
it's the same thing.
Right.
We could go on and on.
Oh, I love it. And so something just really, I don't know, a little epiphany of Mountain Over Thunder as you're talking, especially with what what we really saw in acupuncture school. My acupuncture school was embedded within a naturopathic college. And so there's naturopaths and acupuncturists, and people got really anal retentive about what they were eating
Mhm.
to a point where there was a diagnosable condition called orthorexia, where people were counting calories, counting nutrients, trying to do everything so perfectly that they were actually putting themselves into an eating disorder. And just listening to you talk about that too with CrossFit and as we move and thunder over mountain is like what thunder holds an archetype of your nervous system. And when lightning strikes sand, it creates a mineral called a furgative, I believe, is that may not be pronouncing that right. But when you look at it, it looks just like the myelin sheath on a nerve.
Mhm.
And so lightning thunder has this nervous system gesture archetype.
Mhm.
And so really like where is your nervous system when you're eating? Where is your nervous system when you're giving? Where is your nervous system when you're receiving? If you're in fight or flight mode, if you're in sympathetic overdrive during any of those, you're not going to be nourished or
Mhm.
you're not going to nourish somebody else. If you're giving to somebody because you feel like you have to, or
Fawn.
yeah, exactly. Or you feel like you're going to have to get something back, you know what I mean? Or if you're receiving in a way that's like, okay, what does this mean? Now, what do I have to do for this person if I receive this gift in this way? You know what I mean? Is there going to be this like expectation of giving back? Like, if we need to do all these things, our thunder under our mountain, when we're in this space of grace, gratitude, and reciprocal giving and taking, it
Mhm.
needs to be in our parasympathetic
Mhm.
space of rest, relaxation, and a space of unity rather than
Mhm.
separation.
If you want to be a better gift giver, then start with turning your phone off when you sit in front of your dinner.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really
Exactly.
because it is connected. That
It
whole
is
thread is
connected.
connected.
Yep.
One thing that's funny about this conversation, man, is I'm just like looking at the time and I'm evaluating
Oh,
our own
wow.
journey with this. Like maybe we just need to speak about
Do
one
one key
one
at a
key
time.
for an hour because it's
Right.
really opening between us. But I feel like maybe we should pivot into speaking a little bit
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
28 for the sake of just how we intended today to go. So
Yeah.
28, the pair with 27 is a key called Immortality, the gift of totality, the shadow of purposelessness. So
Mm.
there's when we talk about working with pairs in the I Ching, there's 64 different hexagrams. And when you divide 64 by 2, you get 32. And that 32, there are 32 pairs. They're like molecules. They perpetuate one another. Their shadows drive one
Mhm.
another. Their
Mhm.
gifts drive one another. And so looking at them together can create this experience where you start to see a broader scope on the themes that are at play. So we've just been talking a lot about giving and altruism and selfishness, kind of giving and taking. 28 is always a funny one to me because whenever I see it in somebody's GP's chart, and especially if somebody is like, newer along the journey of just connecting with like spirit and
Mhm.
soul and all of that, to see the word immortality, it's like, how does that, how's that relevant
Right.
to me when I'm dealing with like, credit card debt and, an inability to connect with my partner romantically or something like that. So, it's always a funny one, but then that's where the shadows become this entry point. So purposelessness,
Yeah.
that becomes a more thing like, oh, okay, I can relate perhaps with that experience of feeling purposelessness. What is my purpose? And that craving to know, what am I here for? And how we try to convince ourselves in one way or another of that we're living a life of purpose. This is a thing that I look at through coming from the corporate world and
Mhm.
having trained more in like kind of the valedictorian type of energetic through my whole life of getting like
Right.
hundreds and A's, 4.0
Hmm.
GPAs. Um, Spoiler alert for anybody listening who doesn't know me, but I used to work for ExxonMobil, um, Papa Oil down
All right.
in the Gulf Coast in another life. And, coming from the space of working in chemical engineering, and it was like all for like trying to build this sense of purpose around what I thought I was good at, which was really just kind of molded and sculpted by the educational and economic institutions and frameworks that we all live and have
Of course.
operated through.
Of course.
And we try to convince ourselves really deeply that what we're engaged with is purposeful. And how we'll
Hmm.
look to do that is we'll look and say, oh, well, like look at how I'm helping people, or oh, I'm like intellectually stimulated by the thing that I'm doing, or I get these like nice perks, or look at the outputs of these things that I've
Hmm.
created. But true purpose is never going to come by summing the parts of little checks
Okay.
across your life. True purpose is something that speaks for itself and will call upon you to become the vessel that can hold that purpose. In some ways, comically enough, as you are familiar with, sometimes seemingly against where your intuition may have even been taking you, or just something that makes you gulp a little bit more about what you're being called to lean into.
Yeah.
So there's less of
Hmm.
a proving to myself and more of just a offering of myself to lean into what life is asking of me, rather than trying to convince myself of whatever that is. And so this Keys journey starts coming into reckoning with that deep space. It's like, am I going to die before I've lived a life that it feels like was a purposeful life? And so
Yeah.
this archetype carries. It's funny, with talking, this is the beauty of these pairings. We were talking really deeply of selflessness and this like kind of, as I've interpreted it, a really life-giving archetype. And then
Hmm.
immortality, if you think of immortality, the transcendence of death, this Key's journey is about coming into deep reckoning with death. It
Yeah.
carries within it all of the dark archetypes, as Richard speaks about, of like the demons
Hmm.
and the boogeymen and all of kind of like those dark shades around death. And so there with purposelessness, how do we approach ourselves in our lives and moving forward with sort of that looming cloud that death can strike at any moment? And where do we try to um, run away from that knowing, and or or adapt ourselves in the way that we move through our lives
Right.
to compensate for that fear of death, so that
Yeah.
we can die fulfilled, that we've not failed.
Not failed. Yeah. Or not achieved. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's so rich, and like you said, how these gene keys, these hexagrams, they're opposites. So 28 is now two yin lines on the top and the bottom, and then the middle is filled in with yang. And
Mhm.
so, if you put them two together, they cancel each other out.
Mhm.
And so it's like these frequencies where you have different waves where they can interfere with each other and create these kind of portals of existence, these vortexes thing, or they can lay on top of each other until they cancel each other out.
Mhm.
And I mean, how much purpose have we gained through our collective shared history around providing food? You know what I mean? Like even like who's the breadwinner of the
Mhm.
family, bringing home the bacon, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? And how much purpose have we gained by defending the earth in which we grow our food, defending our homes, defending our countries, you know what I mean? And that a lot of this purpose that we feel has been this challenge and apparent overcoming of death, right? Or at least preventing a death for our loved ones, you know what I mean? Or sacrificing ourselves to help, to allow people to eat or to have homes and stuff like that.
That
So that's,
selfishness I'm gonna take, like I need to take so that I can
yeah,
be fulfilled, so that I can live a life of purpose before I die. That's
right,
where that selfishness and purposelessness come together. That
right,
drive that's like death is going to come, and I've got to take and take and take so that I'm not, I'm not leaving life
right,
empty. Which, when you talk
exactly.
about the higher forget, it's like that. There's
Right.
the joke in that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then how much bypass has there been in the business world of being like, well, my purpose is my business, or just saying, oh, it's just business, and bypassing environmental stuff and bypassing humanitarian stuff,
Mhm.
bypassing so much systemic violence, that has been built into our system by just saying, well, business is business. We do our business so that we can get our money, so that we can survive, so that I can feed my family, that I can feed myself. And so it's almost like this idea that your purpose or like your selfishness is justified by your purpose. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, if we actually come to the table and realize there's enough for everybody, so now I don't have to fight for my plate. I don't have to fight for my seat at the table, and
Mhm.
there's just enough, then what is my purpose?
Mhm.
What is my purpose if it's not to actually take in a greedy fashion? You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
What is my purpose if it's not for me to fight against you so that I
Mhm.
can have what's rightfully mine? But you, but
Which,
you're, but you're, but you're thinking the same
yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
and then the lake over wood in the trigrams here
Mhm.
is really interesting because it's not wood, it's wind, but wind and wood can be simultaneously the same, they have the same name. And so if you think of the wind at the bottom of a lake, lakes are supposed to be still, right?
Mhm.
That the bottom of the lake shouldn't have too much movement.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so when you're in a lake and you feel this movement underneath you, it's
Mhm.
one of the scariest feelings that you'll ever have.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
like the movies of like the Blob or like the Lake Monster,
Jaws.
you know what I mean? Jaws or but more a lake, not an
Yeah.
ocean, because
Okay. Yeah.
ocean is like, some crazy stuff comes out of an ocean,
Sure.
but that lake should be safe.
The
You know what
Loch
I mean?
Ness
Like, yeah,
monster.
yeah, the Loch Ness monster. So it's like when you feel that movement on the bottom of your lake, it's like, woo, it's scary,
Mhm.
and you feel how small you are and how inconsequential you are at the top of the water. And
Mhm.
lake has an archetype of being our joy, of being our bliss, of
Mhm.
being in this still reflection of and with the universe. But when there's movement, when there's that wind at the bottom of your lake,
Mhm.
then like that is where, yeah, like you said, the boogeyman and these demons and
I'm
these
thinking
other
of like
things that
every
come.
horror movie, how it
Yeah,
begins, where like something moves that is like
yeah,
unexpected, in
exactly.
your like piece, something
Right.
moves that is like subtle, and it
Yeah,
just that starts to
that
flare up into,
yeah, that ghost.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
There's Richard talks, um he talks about how, like, once energy and food are solved, that's pretty much
Yeah,
it. Everything
yeah.
comes down to energy and food. And so then it's like, what do you do when there's no longer a fight around those things?
Exactly.
And um, I also want to bring in for people a beautiful way that he's framed the journey of the shadow to the gift of this key, that really just opened it for me, which is that in purposelessness, there are two kind of bands. There are three octaves of fear that kind of spread between the shadow and the gift of this key. So in
Hmm.
purposelessness, the first layer band is the fear of living. This would be the people who kind of like recluse the weight of the world
Hmm.
and all of its boogeymen and just the terrors of the world cripples that life force, where somebody's just like, I don't even want to go outside. I'm thinking right now of the I don't know exactly what the term is culturally, but in Japan, where they have this thing where because of like the crushing pressures of society, there's this thing that happens where some people will they'll basically just like kind of give up on their lives and their apartments, and then they'll never they don't leave their bed, and then their room
Mm.
just becomes this like festering mess, and their families try to take care of them, but
Yeah.
they basically have just collapsed
Mm.
from the immensity of the pressure. And so there's that fear of living that like I don't, I don't want to go outside, let me lock all my doors, and that being kind of this lowest, living sort of this like safe, false safe life, but not really actually ever living. And then the next octave becomes the fear of dying. This
Mm.
onsets as Richard speaks, and I resonate with myself in some ways, most coming around the age of 40, where it's like, now all of a sudden death is like hanging there a little bit more, the over the
Mm.
hump energy. And so then it becomes this thing of, and it gives rise to what I see, especially nowadays, in the wellness tech space of how can I do as many cold plunges and get
Right.
all these
Yeah.
like amino peptides, and
Yeah.
what's his name, Brian Johnson or whatever, who's like literally has this brand Don't Die, and is this popularity campaign around
Right.
how can I live as long as possible, and it's really this space of
Right.
fearing death.
And then just like counting all your calories and your nutrients and that orthorexia that we talked about in the other key.
Exactly
Yeah.
that. So those are these first two bands of fear within purposelessness. And then when you get to the gift of totality is so beautiful because it starts to change into a really healthy fear, which is the fear of
Mm.
not living.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of not
Mm-hmm.
living, as Richard speaks,
So true.
is so beautiful because it becomes this energy that's like death is imminent, and so I'm going to give of myself totally
Totally.
to this moment, to this day. And it kind of takes all of that fear and it transforms it, it alchemizes it into life. So this is where when I
Yeah.
was talking about how selflessness, it's like you've got like the white yin with the drop of yang, the giving of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and as like the death. And then in immortality, it's like it's the yang is kind of the container of like the death energy, but then in that you have the drop of that yin. Maybe I've done
Mm-hmm.
it backwards a little bit, I don't know, but to me it's
Sure.
it's
Either
it's
way.
it's that like because of the container of death, you give of yourself
Yeah.
that much more fully to life
Mm.
as and while you're here. And
Right.
that for me transformed my relationship with purpose because it
Mm.
starts to take you away from that crippling weight of who am I going to become? What am I
Yeah.
going to be? And it
Right.
starts to introduce a mechanism, a method of relating with your day, with your moment of how can I
Mm.
bring myself more fully
Fully.
to what's right here? How can
Mm-hmm.
I give, if I'm going to die in an hour, how can I give the fullest of myself
Right.
right now while I'm sitting, hanging out, playing with my son? Or how
Yeah.
can I give the fullest of myself in this moment to celebrate my partner for her birthday because who knows, it may be the last time that I do. Like
Right.
those, it's not that that is so clouded in this panicky way, but it becomes this subtle background space where it's like, hey, death, I see you. I
Mm-hmm.
know that you're there. And because we have a relationship and there's a certainty of that, I can actually find life force in
Right.
the acknowledgement of your presence, not the denial and shunning away and running away or the fighting of you, but I actually embrace your certainty. And so,
Yeah.
therefore, because of that, I can be fueled much more deeply with my connection with life in
Oh
this
my
moment.
God. Oh my God. That's so awesome. And
Mhm.
that's so true because it's like if you like the totality of the gift, if you embrace the totality of your life, then death is an equal playing partner in that relationship.
Mhm.
And so, just as you said, if you keep the juxtaposition of your death next to you, then you will truly live. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I feel that a big piece of this discussion that was coming alive for me as you were talking is that we have externalized purpose. somehow like our purpose is tied into how much we can earn, how much we can accumulate, what we do, our accolades, our resume, our life, vita, our whole kind of like externalization of what we've done or what we have, earned or accumulated. When really the truth is that our purpose is in us. It's our virtue of just being alive. It's inside of us. And like the famous quote from Jesus, which is like, look at the flowers in the field. They don't toil, they don't spin. They're not sitting there. Like you don't see a coyote looking for like a therapist to become a better coyote, you know? You don't like eagles don't have life coaches, you know what I mean? It's like life just shows up on stage and lives, and that living is actually the slow disintegration of themselves, and like that selflessness of like sacrificing themselves, making their life sacred. And we're like Tibetan prayer flags, where they're meant to be in the wind, they're meant to be tattered, they're meant to be broken down, because when they break down, that's when their prayers are released.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so it's like it's in our living, it's in our slow dying of every day, of our aging, that we're actually releasing our purpose. We're releasing our virtue into the world. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm.
And that and like then it gets into the city of immortality of like, yes, yeah, we are immortal, but you only have this very short band of time and space to be this expression of you that is holding these gene keys, right?
Mhm.
So I may have this immortal spirit that has lived in many, many, many lives, but it's only in this time, in this space, that I get to be Sean Orlando. Never has this genomic expression come before me, and never will it return again.
Mhm.
Like I have this moment and this moment only to be in my fullness, to be in my totality, right?
Mhm.
And it's only because death is right next to me. And I never know when death is going to come in and to like end the timeline here.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
even though I'm immortal, like I have this moment, which is where Christianity kind of like really hits the mark in saying like you have one life, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Do it right.
Yeah.
Like that kind of fear gets appropriated into not such a healthy space, but there is this element of like, you have one shot, one opportunity, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. It
What
is.
what,
It
what are
is
you
the
gonna do?
it is the YOLO frequency. That
Yeah, right.
there's an
Yeah,
asterisk. There's an asterisk on the YOLO.
yeah.
Just like you only live once as
As
you,
this.
as
Yeah.
this. We'll have to like submit an addendum to Urban Dictionary, so they get the definition right.
Yeah, I love it.
But yeah, and this uh, I found in my own journey with this key, um, that it's whenever I've contemplated, it's always brought me really close to death or somebody dying or somebody being buried, and to really witness, um, just like when we were talking about with the selfishness, that like I'm only going to give if I can receive, the transacting around
Mm,
giving. Immortality, this key, purposelessness, and relating with death being so deeply embedded in this archetype, and coming into contact with our ability to let go
mm,
when death arrives, and
yeah.
how much waste there is in the entire death industry.
Oh.
I was
Mm,
walking, because this was just the other week where I was at a funeral, and I was walking where they have this kind of mausoleum on site, and I needed to find the bathroom. And I thought that it was like a chapel. And then I went in and I was looking at all of this marble on the walls. And I started to realize that the grid lattice layout of the marble on the walls, that they were all pods for bodies. And
wow.
I'm walking along these corridors, and it became a little bit like overwhelming, where I'm like, oh my God. And then you see somebody's name inscribed there and somebody's name inscribed here. Of course, like catacombs, and, it's been ancient where under different temples or churches, that there are, priests and saints and, all this buried. But just to be in this modern expression of that, of the extent by which we, as the living, have been so unable to let go when somebody physically passes.
Yeah.
And the amount of how it's all also been funny to me when you look at a cemetery, you'd think that we're putting all these crosses, especially around like more Catholic and Christianity leaning cemeteries, where you would think that it would be the symbol of your loved one entering into heaven, and yet
Right.
it looks like doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Who decided to make the cast iron gates with the spikes?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe one way or another you can't really get past the grayness of
Mhm.
stone, which is maybe death just kind of staking its claim and saying, "Hey, no matter what you want to do, like I'm just this is death, and you can have the
Right.
prettiest tombstone that you want, the prettiest crypt. Death is just going to show you the decay that's eventually going to come to all of that.
Hmm.
Everything you take any cemetery and you fast forward 1,000 years, and if you left it unkept, it would just be consumed by
Yeah.
decay.
Yeah.
It's and that just becomes such a joke to me because it's like, what is it? What is it really all for? Ultimately, it's all to satiate the living's inability to let go.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's masked with this virtuous thing of creating a space to honor that person. But it actually imprisons them to
Yeah.
that locality, and it imprisons them in that space and blocks them in many ways from being able to live everywhere with you as the infinite spirit that they have now been released
Are.
to be
Yeah.
and are.
Good. That's so interesting because it feeds right into back into 27 and this idea of like being selfish in your own grief. You know what I mean? Of
Yeah,
like
exactly.
when you are like someone passes and then you're like, "Oh my God, look how terrible my life is now because I lost this person." You know what I mean? Or when someone passes,
I'm sorry for
everybody,
your loss.
I'm sorry for your loss. It's like, what was lost? You know what I mean? Yeah, this physical expression is no longer here, but the actual spirit and soul of the person isn't lost. And I really feel like my father passed last summer, and that whole experience for me was this really like reckoning of like he didn't go really anywhere. He like had a dimensional shift in his experience as this living maybe not breathing anymore, but this vital energy that's in like intricate and integral to the whole universe. He didn't go anywhere. And that there's been many experiences that you've helped facilitate where I've been in direct contact with him and my projection of that energy that has then, been able to hold this form and this pathway of communication, which is very much like I'm still here, I am right here, I'm still with you. I can even have a relationship with you, albeit different than how it was.
Mhm.
And like just imagine like passing and going through one of the greatest initiations and celebrations, transitions that life has to offer you. And then you're sitting there, and then everybody who you were close to is just wrecked. And they're in their own selfish, grief process of being like, look at me,
Mhm.
poor me, I've lost so much. And then you're going around being like, hey guys, this is great.
I've
you know?
directly experienced
Yeah,
that. I've
I'm I'm
directly
I'm with
experienced
grandma and grandpa, I'm with uncle, I'm with your auntie. Like we are having a great time, and you guys like change your diapers because it's not that
Yeah.
bad,
I've
you know?
experienced like how dare you comments for
Yeah.
not being more devastated
Yeah,
before.
right,
And that
right. Oh
is
yeah.
that is yeah, and
Yeah, it's hard.
love them for their pain, that
Yeah.
they, need that from you to feel safe in their
Hmm.
own feeling of their pain. But
Right.
you know, the more that I've spent time with this key, as distant as it felt early on, the more I've grown to really love it. And maybe we just wrap up in speaking a little bit about immortality. But maybe before
Yeah.
that, I just want to, because in the spirit of welcoming people into practices, just like with 27 selflessness and selfishness and altruism, we were talking about looking clearly into your way of relating with giving in life. This, to me, with Immortality 28, the gift of totality, the shadow of purposelessness, would be a real deep invitation to look keenly into your relationship with death,
Mm-hmm.
in many ways with letting go, how your relationship with death has um, has impacted the way that you live and how you're able to bring the fullness of yourself in any moment. Um, because I feel that that is uh, it's like to truly know life, you must know death. To truly know death, you must know life, and they're
Mm-hmm.
inextricably linked. And so, to live the fullest, we must be in fullest contact with our relationship with death, which is why when you go across any tradition, any mystery school, it's ultimately a school to come into contact with your way of
Right.
relating with death while
Yep.
alive, so that when your moment of death comes, you do not fear it, and you can walk fully through that gateway with total presence. And I think of, in Tibetan Buddhism, and there's the whole mystical concept of the rainbow body and the disintegration of the physical form into these
Mm-hmm.
rays of rainbow iridescent light. Um, and to whatever anybody wants to say about that, I'll just say my own way of relating with that is that those mystical masters who passed through the gate of death in that way, where their body disintegrated into the rainbow body, that came through the full embrace of death and the ability to stay fully present in that moment of passing through that gate. Therefore, no part of them was
Mm.
clinging on to the form
Right. Yep.
of the physical.
Yeah. Right. It's so beautiful.
And that I truly frame that everything
Mm.
that I'm doing in my life is just preparing me for that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm just preparing myself to be able to meet death
For that passage.
with grace. And that doesn't mean that I need to think about it every single day or be one of those nutsos. I saw this thing somewhere on the
Right.
internet where somebody made like a giant poster that basically took, think about like a giant
Mm.
grid lattice where, say, you take 365 days times, 85 years of your life, and you made 365 times 85 that number of boxes
Mm.
with a marker to go and check off every single day through your life,
Wow.
moving
That's
out.
insane.
I saw one of that. I was like, that is so insane. To
That's, yeah.
live with that. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. It's not like
No.
living with this like looming,
No.
oh my God, like checking boxes off on my way to death.
It actually reminds me of a story of your invitation to really examine your relationship with death. It was in a book about the healing power of prayer. And it was this doctor who was very successful, very accomplished, gets his own checkup, gets the diagnosis of cancer. And it's inoperable. It's it's going to claim his life. And his doctor says you have 1 year to live. If you're lucky if you live for 1 year.
Mhm.
So this doctor is devastated, told his family he's in this place and now he has 1 year to live. So what is he going to do? And so he's like, I'm going to write my memoirs so that I'm remembered by my children and my grandchildren. And so he starts to write the story of his life. And he gets to this space in med school where he did all this research and he like discovered this like really amazing process, and it was going to fast track him into this like fame and notoriety and early success in his career. And wouldn't you know it, his lab partner stole all his work and published it for himself and claimed all that fame for himself.
and he had been so pissed about it all his life, and he was about to write about it, and then he stopped and he said, "You know what? I don't want to be remembered in death by like the shitty things that happened to me. I don't want to be remembered by the things that I'm carrying resentment for." And so he chose not to write about it. And he had this clearing of it energetically, I'm sure, as he decided that my life isn't going to be remembered by the things that weighed me down or like made me mad or anything like that. And he went and he wrote his whole memoirs, and each time he hit this kind of roadblock in his life that was filled with, like, more of what we would consider to be a negative frequency, around anger, resentment, all that kind of stuff. He resolved it and decided not to include it in his story. And wouldn't you know it, a year goes by and he's still living, goes back in for a checkup, and his cancer is completely gone.
Wow.
And so it's like, how, like, I would extend my an invitation to yours is like, where is your fear of death robbing you of purpose? You know what I mean? And where in your life has your clinging to like this kind of selfish style of nourishment, of taking because you're in the scarcity mode, where is that denying you of purpose as well? You know what I
So
mean?
beautiful, man.
Like, what kind of compulsive behaviors are you engaging in that is like tying you into this place where you're not allowing to actually live fully of who you are and what you have to offer to this life?
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
beautiful, man. I love that so much. I wanted to cap off by just talking about immortality,
Mhm.
and again, so much like with just Richard's transmission opened up so much for me, but I love how he's saying where there's so much intention now around how can we live as long as possible.
Yeah.
Even if you crack the code to be able to live to 300, a whole new way of relating with life would take over, because if you all of a sudden could live to the year of 500,
Right.
you would the that fear of death isn't gone.
No.
And so what would happen to people is maybe you'd be that much more afraid to walk outside of your house or get into a car
Right.
because, oh my God, I have 500 years to live. More
Right.
youthful. I'm not going to let anything possibly happen to me where I might die.
Exactly.
And so then you
You're
create
just scared of
this
life.
airbag culture,
Yeah.
or you become kind of one of these other people who are like, well, I'm I'm going to, you know, do as much as I can. I'm going to become the most achieved person because, now I have more time. So I'm going to do every single thing. I'm going to go and hike every single mountain. I'm going to go, and it's
Hmm.
like just that it it's this thing. Like when you just think about, okay, we're all in this together. Everybody sort of lives to be around this age before they physically die. Um, but then if you just automatically extended it, if you found the way to move beyond that through modern science, that it wouldn't just actually create this peace in people's systems automatically. It would actually create more stress and anxiety because now you're, because that purposelessness, like, oh my God, if I have 500 years to live and I die at age 40, then I've barely even scratched the surface of my life. And that's a purposeless life, right?
Right.
So
Right.
this whole, and I love how he talks how all of the great myths, Gilgamesh, and so forth, they really touch into these mythical experiences around, like, it's like the fountain of eternal life,
Yeah.
and to become immortal, to transcend death. And so that to me is such an interesting higher octave contemplation of this whole way of relating with death, because when you start to remove the typical parameters around which we've come to normalize and associate with and interpret death in our lives, and you start to entertain the possibilities, whether through modern science or something else, of living in immortal existence, where does that where does the fear become more pronounced rather
Right.
than become more satiated and
Right.
subdued?
Right. It's such a great thing to contemplate. And for me, it's like we shouldn't be trying to transcend death.
we should be transcending, or more like transmuting fear, you know, and to live more fully. And again, that goes back to the nourishment of 27, of like, what is your inner state of nervous energy in your nervous system, but state of anxiety and fear when you are nourishing yourself, when you're going through life, you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm.
And it's only that our immortality and selflessness are mixed together. And really, the truth of our immortality can only be there when we embrace death
Mhm.
and we allow death to be a dance partner with our lives.
Mhm.
And then we can really embrace what it really means to be immortal, what it really means to be this conscious being coming in and out of this physical experience.
The
You know what
eternal
I mean?
presence that can never
The
die.
internal print that can never die.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is that if you have a balanced, healthy nervous system, while you move into the mortal coil of needing to eat and wanting to help other people eat, actually your human cells, there is science around this idea that if your cells environment, meaning that they're not being poisoned by environmental, poisons
Mhm.
or emotional poisons inside your body, then your cells can live forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there is this piece about human existence where there is this like tickle of the possibility of immortality,
Exactly.
especially in Chinese medicine with like there are 8 immortals
Mhm.
and documented people living to 250 and all these things, but it's not, you don't reach that place by fearing death. You reach that place by loving life and entering into this place of surrender and selflessness.
Mhm.
And then it's just by the grace of God, by the grace of your own divinity, do you move through life in such a way that you are given more and more opportunity to
Mhm.
really experience this particular moment, this particular frame.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
you can get into the various mythical and mystic traditions of transcending your body and being
Mhm.
able to ascend and all that space.
Mhm.
But I really feel that does not come from being scared to die, you
No,
know?
absolutely not. Nor does it
Yeah,
come from sacrificing things like um, your human organs for artificial
yeah,
mechanized
right.
organs and tissues that in order to live forever. There's
Yeah,
that thing of like, okay, well, I'm turning my body into a machine in order to
right,
live forever.
right,
And that is it's like you may live for 250 years, but you died the moment
right.
that you put in,
Exactly.
artificial organs throughout your whole entire
Right,
body in order to do that.
right.
And so what then are you? And these
Yeah.
are important questions for the times
No,
that we're
it
stepping
is.
into.
It is important. And this is seeing the body as a machine with these replaceable parts rather than seeing your body as just a waveform within your consciousness. So that
You identify so
your
much with the body.
yeah, and well, but your organs are playing out the metabolism, they metabolize consciousness for you. They metabolize emotions for you. They're an integral part to who you are as this experiencing unit of like creativity, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so when you can move into life and rather than say that my purpose is not just living more. My purpose isn't just getting more. My purpose isn't just being recognized
Mhm.
more. My purpose isn't just eating more or whatever, satiating this immediate need to fill my mouth with something.
Mhm.
But really, my purpose is to express my potential for creative love. For to love in this way that only I can. Only I can share from my point of view, and I share that fully through my love of myself and others and life. And so how can I move into the moment in that space of full purpose, purposeful, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Full of purpose. And that you have to have death as a friend,
Yeah.
you know?
Amen, man. I think beautifully
Yeah,
said and wrapped up. I'll give one final nod to
please.
profound artists who died
Mm,
young, like Jimi
mm,
Hendrix,
yeah.
Prince, and it's like they're immortalized by just the impact of their life, the totality through which they lived during the period of time that they were alive, and their impact on culture, their impact on music. In that here today in 2025, however many decades past their death, they live on and they activate and unlock and bring life force into people's hearts in the way that they move and feel enjoyment, joy with life.
Mm,
And that, this is even one way of connecting with your relationship with death, which sometimes can maybe even feel a little bit difficult if it's so close to you. Your father or mother passed, or brother passed, or child passed, or something, tragic. But maybe even looking at an artist who is really impactful to you. It could be a painter,
right.
it could be
I love that.
a musician, somebody who moves life force within you well after their death. And seemingly there's no end in sight to the way that they will just continue to live on and be culturally relevant.
Hmm.
And so can you kind of connect with the energy of that spirit, those spirits, these poets, whoever it is, and
Hmm.
kind of feel, how might I live more fully in this moment, where perhaps by befriending my relationship with death and living more fully in this experience of the moment, that
Yeah.
perhaps I have an impact on life, where long after my physical form is decayed and disintegrated and my dust scattered across the earth, that others may find life
Yeah.
through
Beautiful.
my immortal energy living on and being passed
Right.
along. So,
So well
and
said. Yeah.
here we are, how many thousands of years later,
Right.
experiencing the immortal essence of the I Ching,
Yeah.
and those who drew the pictographs thousands of years
Right.
ago.
Right. Exactly
So
right. And
deep bows to all of them.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well said. That's the perfect way to wrap this up.
Well, thank you everybody who joined us along for this journey. Again, we're your co-hosts, Patrick and Sean, and every single week, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, we hop on and we talk about a couple of different archetypes within the I Ching, the gene keys, and really braid this ancient take of the I Ching with modern transmission and interpretation through the gene keys. So thank you
Yeah.
all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patrick.